Hey guys, welcome back for our first installment of our discussion of the Great Gatsby. And today we're going to tackle chapter 1, and we're going to look at this from a perspective of if you were studying it from, a high school type of course like what this is. So we're going to look at things like, especially in these first few chapters, it will be exposition based. We're going to look at characterization, setting, those types of things. But we're also going to start building towards the theme. As the chapters develop, we're going to move more to theme and connections to the real world. But these first few chapters, like with most stories, need to establish your, important exposition pieces. So we're going to look at main characters in this, important characters in this. We're going to look at our setting, like I said, and we're going to see the initial stages of conflict here. So, all right, when I go over these, I have a set of notes here that I'm looking at to kind of remind me of the big points. But I want you guys to understand that what we cover in this video is intended to try to get this in 15 to 20 minutes. It's not enough to just watch the video. There's a lot of stuff you're going to miss. There's a lot of important stuff that we may not cover in the video. So be sure to look at the actual reading and then watch this. If you have not read the chapter yet, stop the video, read the chapter, and then come back. All right? So before we get started on this, I want to talk a little bit about why this book is so important to me, because it is my favorite book. And it's by my favorite author. So I absolutely love Fitzgerald. I think everything he's ever written is brilliant. I believe that his prose is art done at the highest level. We're studying this not just so that you can pick out who the main character is. I mean, that's middle school reading. We're studying this because I want you to see what art looks like. And, it's easy for you guys to identify what a beautiful painting or a beautiful piece of music is, but beautiful writing right now is something most of you probably struggle with. But this is an example of that. Everything Fitzgerald says is just done in an impressive way that really I don't think's ever been duplicated. So, not advertising for Pepsi. Let's cover that up. All right. Another thing is one of the main points in this is the critique of the American dream, and that is key. This is something that we need to consider because there's a lot of myth surrounding and there's a lot of mystique surrounding this concept of the American dream, but we really need to be honest about where we are today and how that has altered so that we can fix it and get it back to where it should be. I also like that modern writing is my favorite thing because I do like the sense of moral ambiguity. I don't want to read a book that is moralizing, that's just telling me this is how you should behave and this is what you should do. Not that those things don't have their place, but I don't feel like it's in literature. Literature is about capturing that realism, and that's what this book does. The fact that people aren't good and bad, the fact that we're all inherently flawed and we have good and bad traits, and some are worse than others, granted, but for the most part, this book doesn't really seem to lecture you. Now, that being said, there's definite tone is the way authors are able to lecture us. This book definitely has tone towards various things like greed and the wealthy and things like that are also worth studying, okay? I also love the characters. The characters are strong, they're realistic, they're memorable. If Fitzgerald wants you to like a character, it doesn't matter what they do, they're likable. If he wants you to hate a character, you're going to hate him. No matter your background, no matter what your beliefs are, nobody likes Tom Buchanan. And we find ourselves cheering for Gatsby, even though Gatsby's a bootlegger and an adulterer, and yet we still find ourselves cheering for him. So this is writing that it's subtly done in a way that you don't even realize it. But when you really look at characters like Gatsby, he's really not a good person, and yet we find ourselves cheering for him. All right. Finally, like I said, I like that there's no real good or bad, which is much more interesting than when it's clearly delineated. There's a reason why people like Batman more than they do Superman for the most part. Especially like when you look at Superman in the older comics where, he was a Boy Scout. He did everything, he was supposed to. And then you had Batman, who was this flawed, damaged character, and, he's considered much more popular. So all of these are key elements, okay? So knowing that, let's get into the actual book, okay? So we start off with the characterization of our narrator, who is Nick Carraway. Now, Nick is the representation of what an unreliable narrator is. Now, let me let you know a little secret. Every first-person narrator, unreliable. Not purposefully, usually, but the fact is that we can only tell our story from the lens we have, which is our own personal one. When I interpret other people's actions, I may be correct in my assumptions, but I'm still making assumptions, okay? If I see one of you with your head down on the desk, I can assume that you think my lecture is boring and that you don't care about my class, but there may be more to the story. You may have been up all night because one of your parents was sick and you were at the hospital with them. You may have had an early morning practice that wore you out. There's various things that it could be, and I don't have that information to make that call. So I'm unreliable as a narrator, even though it happened in my presence. I don't know what really went on, and that's what we constantly talk about Nick, and the other one is actually Gene from A Separate Piece. If you read that back in 10th grade. So those two are considered literature in high school. Those are the guys you go to for your unreliable narrator. So we get this introduction to Nick, and he gives us his background. Some of the most iconic opening lines in literature. One of the great things about The Great Gatsby is that it takes some of the greatest opening lines and, in my opinion, the greatest finishing lines in all of American literature and perhaps in literature in general. That's a little bit grand for sure, but definitely, in my opinion, the greatest in American literature. I probably would say the ending is the best in any kind of literature across any time period. That's how much I love it, all right? The opening lines, though, we get this famous thing. In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages you've had. This image here is of Nick presenting himself, and the next few paragraphs continue this theory that Nick is this observant character. He's there to observe and record the story of Gatsby. He's not there to judge, and in a lot of ways that happens. He doesn't come out and speak out against the affair that Gatsby and his cousin are having. He doesn't come out and condemn Tom for his behavior. He doesn't condemn Gatsby for his. In fact, at times, and this is where he crosses the line and is being somewhat of a biased narrator, and that he does seem to lean towards Gatsby and applaud his behavior, even though it is in a lot of ways, bad behavior. All right. So this whole story is set up in a flashback. Nick is telling this after the end of the story. And so when he says, and I like these lines better than the beginning lines, when he says, let me find it. He says, no, Gatsby turned out all right at the end. It was what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. And that is, in my opinion, an example of what beautiful prose looks like. He's saying that Gatsby turned out all right in the end. And those of you who read the book know how ironic this is, okay? And those of you who didn't read the book, get ready to have the ending spoiled for you because you should have done it over the summer, like I told you. Gatsby's dead at the end of this book. So the fact that he turned out all right, obviously you could say, well, he means that before that point, obviously Gatsby turned out okay. But when you read the book, that's really very much of an arguable statement if Gatsby's doing better. Once Gatsby's dream collapses on him due to, what happens with him and Daisy, I don't think he's better. But then his death, in a way, saves him from all of this. It removes him from a world that really, in all honesty, he wasn't equipped to continue in. So that's a big deal, all right? Someone says he was all right. He says that what preyed on his dream that was terrible. And this is going to be where, as we develop our ideas, that we talk about the American dream, about the dream itself, if it's representative of Gatsby, that it is this amazing dream, but what's been preying on that dream is what's destroying it. And what we're going to be tasked with as we get in through this book is what do we think today is preying upon the American dream and causing it to end up in a lot of ways like Gatsby, disillusioned and perhaps even dead. Okay, so lots of good stuff about Nick. Nick obviously, in a way, worships Gatsby. He really does. He looks up to him. He tries his best not to come off as a fanboy for Gatsby, but, he really is, okay? The next section that's kind of important is a setting where we get a little bit. There's 4 settings in this book that we really want to know. We're going to get 2 of them right here. We're going to get West Egg and East Egg. Later on, we're going to get the Valley of Ashes, which is a very symbolic area, and then we'll also get the city proper of New York City. But first of all, we get West and East Egg. And these have got an interesting comparison. Now, I'm going to skip around in the book a little bit here because actually this comparison comes much later in the chapter on page 12. Page 12 in this version, which I don't think anyone but I have. So here we go. I'm going to read this whole paragraph to you. It says, sometimes she and Miss Baker talked all at once, unobtrusively and with a bantering inconsequence that was never quite chatter, that was as cool as their white dresses and their impersonal eyes in the absence of all desire. They were here, and they accepted Tom and me, making only a polite, pleasant effort to entertain or to be entertained. They knew that presently dinner would be over, and a little later the evening, too, would be over, and casually put away. It was sharply different from the West, where an evening was hurried from phase to phase toward its close, in a continually disappointed anticipation or else in sheer nervous dread of the moment itself. So right away we get this image of the East as being this almost relaxed, habitual sense of wealth, where these people know what's going to happen next. They know how their food's going to be handled. They know, when tea time is, and I know that was a kind of a stereotypical thing to say, but they know everything about their life is organized and planned out for them, as opposed to the West, which is this hectic, crazy, frantic lifestyle. As you would see today you could compare two things, like the old money people of Boston that have, they go summer, in the Hamptons, and then they, spend their weekends at their lake house or whatever. And then compare that to LA, where, the nightlife is crazy and people are wild. So we're going to see a lot of comparison between the new money and old money, and that's really what these two represent. East Egg is the old money place. This is where we have the wealthy people who have inherited their money. They're not people who have earned their money per se. Okay, some of them may have worked for money, but this money is money that's generational wealth. These are people who've never had to really work a day of their life. They may have, but they didn't have to. Versus West Egg. West Egg is our new money people. And by new money, I mean people who may have been poor or middle class growing up, but have come into some sort of money because of usually their own doing. Now, sometimes it's something good. Perhaps, like today, perhaps it might be, a musician or some sort of entertainer, a movie star, that sort of thing, a writer perhaps. Or you have Gatsby and characters like him who have come into their wealth through criminal means. Because Gatsby's a bootlegger. Again, let me spoil a little bit of it for you. But Gatsby's in the criminal world and has also got it. Now, the funny thing about this, and this I will argue still continues today, and we'll discuss this in class, is that you would think that the new money people would be the ones we would applaud and say, hey, these guys are the ones we want to be like, because they went from nothing and became something, which supposedly is the American dream, correct? But yet, as we see in this novel, Gatsby and the other West Egg people are locked out of that upper echelon of wealth because they weren't born with it. So instead, we are applauding the people who are given wealth through no work or fault of their own. They're just blessed with it out of nothing they've done. And this club continually keeps the people who work hard. Now, Gatsby may be a criminal, but let's just be honest, he still worked hard. But he's consistently be locked out of this and never be accepted. And that's one of the things that really Fitzgerald's hammering home, is that no matter how hard you try to achieve this dream of, coming from something to nothing, you may have a good bank account, but you're always going to be poor or, undeserving in the eyes of the upper, 5%. So that's kind of a discussion for us to have in class, if that actually still exists today or not. I think you can tell by my tone how I feel. So we also see Nick's house, which is weird. West Egg is this beautiful place of gaudy mansions, and then Nick's little ramshackle thing just sitting there off to the side next to Gatsby's massive mansion where no one really pays attention to it. And really, to be honest with you, that's kind of Nick. Nick is this wallflower that blends into the back of many of these scenes. We're going to see Daisy and Gatsby in some of these iconic scenes, and Nick's there because he's telling the story, but he just kind of sits in the back and watches these two, carry on. So the house is really, emblematic of Nick himself. Also, there's a really cool line, and this line is only cool in the context of a line that comes up later, it's not my favorite line in the book, but it's one of them. But I'll read this to you to lay the seeds for this later on. All right, he says, and this is back at the beginning, nearly on the first couple of pages. He says, and so with the sunshine and the great bursts of leaves growing on the trees, just as things grow in fast movies, I had that familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer. Now, I want you to file that one away. This is one of those elements of great writers, because later in the novel, we're going to see a reference to that's going to kind of parallel this. But instead of the summer, it's going to talk about autumn. And it's a really neat thing to bookend, okay? So let's just leave that right now. We'll come back to it, okay? So moving on. Sorry, I got to move my notes up a little bit. The next big thing we run into is two of our characters. We're going to see three characters here in a row that all serve as major parts of the book, and it's going to leave us with pretty much all of our main characters except the Wilsons, George and Myrtle, who we'll see in a little while. But next we're going to get Tom and Daisy Buchanan and Jordan Baker, and these three are going to be, again, very major players in this book. Now, we get Tom first. And as I pointed out, good writers can take a wide base of readership and say, okay, this is the guy I want you to like, and you may have different likes and different things you look up to, but we're going to find a way to make this person likable, and then we're also going to find a way to make this person detestable. And that's exactly what happens with Tom. Tom is given all the stereotypic qualities that make, no matter what your moral system is, no matter what your likes and dislikes are, no one likes Tom Buchanan. He is a terrible person. That being said, Tom Buchanan does have some admirable traits later in the book, and some of the things even here are admirable, but the bad traits stick out, and that's a great trick from Fitzgerald to make us look at those and say, oh, this guy's terrible. I mean, he's a brutish hulking. Hulking is the word that Daisy will use later, and in fact, Tom gets very mad at her for using that phrase. But it's this brutish, hulking, like jock-type character. Well, Mr. Morris calling him a jock's mean. No, that's not where it stops. So if that's all it was, well, that would be fine. But, I mean, Daisy and Tom are both very stereotyped figures, okay? Now, Daisy's got a little bit of a wrinkle in her character that changes that, but not Tom. Tom isn't quite intelligent, but he pretends to be. He's gone to a fancy school, he's got a fancy education, but when he starts trying to talk about this book, this racist book he's been reading, he kind of stumbles over it, and he never is able to really nail down what the book's about. It's like, if you ask someone, if I asked half of you about this book, you may have read the back of it, know a little bit, but then if I asked you to go into great detail, a lot of you would stumble through it and, not make much sense. And that's kind of what Tom does here. It says Fitzgerald makes him unlikable by most standards on purpose. The traits that he's given, he's a racist. He starts talking about, the white race being erased by others. He's an adulterer, because we get that in the next few pages. His mistress even calls, and that's Myrtle, by the way. She calls their house while they're having family time, and Tom gets up and takes the phone call, even though everyone knows what it is. So not only is he an adulterer, he's a brazen one. And he's also quite conceited. He's very haughty and proud of who he is and looks down on other people, even friends like Nick, who these two know each other from the past. All right, they went to college together. All right, the next, by the way, one more thing about him that's kind of a really cool detail. And again, I think I gave this to you in the PowerPoint. The movie does a good job of showing this. When Tom enters a room, he deflates the people around him. The description used when we first see Jordan and Daisy, that not literally, that figuratively happens. They're all bouncy and they're excited, and then Tom walks in and it says specifically, let me see if I've got it written down. I wrote down that says Daisy and Jordan are described as balloons, and when he enters, they float to the ground. So I'm not sure about the exact wording, but definitely it's like they're deflated by his presence. He just sucks the joy out of a room. Now, Daisy's going to be a character that's developed in small bursts, okay? But we get a lot about her early on. You're going to see frequently her associated with her voice. Her voice is her defining feature, as well as her blonde hair, but they're going to talk about her voice frequently. And it's got a sing-song quality. They say it sounds like it's full of money at a later point. But we definitely get the image, at least initially, of she's stereotyped as that typical airheaded person. She giggles a lot. She can't seem to stay focused. She talks about her child, whose name is Pammy or Pamela or Pam. They got different ways of putting it, but she just calls her the baby, and she can't seem to stay on a point. She says things like, let's plan something. What do people plan? What a dumb thing to say. This woman is in her late 20s or early 30s. I think she's in her late 20s, and she can't seem to hold down a thought of any sort. She seems unfocused and all over the place, but the truth is this is an act, and we know this by coming up by what happens at the end of this chapter. And we're going to see that Daisy's much deeper than she seems, which again is an important element of character, especially in modern writing. You don't want a fully stereotyped character. You want characters to be a little, more than what is expected. Now, Tom's fully stereotyped, okay? Although Tom's going to do some things that we may not expect. But he's definitely, the stereotypical brutish, half-intelligent, thinks he's really important, jock type character that has been recast multiple times in movies and books. All right. Now, the next character that comes in is Jordan Baker. She's actually there with them. And Jordan's going to be Nick's love interest. And I put that in very, very heavy air quotes because really they're kind of forced together because, they're a guy and a girl and they're with other people. You see that happen in a lot of places. In schools, you've got a friend group and there's a guy and a girl who are both single and everybody automatically thinks they should be together. Well, they do that here. But let me tell you something about these two. They are not in any way, shape, or form in love. There's no concept of love attached to these characters. And Jordan's another character that most people find themselves really disliking. She doesn't have a lot of admirable qualities. She's a golfer. I don't know if I'd say a professional golfer, but she does play on that sort of circuit. She may be professional. Never really talks, I don't think, about money she makes, but let's call her that. She cheats, though, constantly. She's not designed to be a likable person from the moment we meet her. She uses words like contemptuously when she's talking to Nick, so she's automatically looking down on him. She finds out he's from West Egg, and she immediately mentions Gatsby's name, hoping to spark a problem between Tom and Daisy. So she's one of those people that just stirs things up, and you know those people. You probably have friends like them, and you may be these people. By the way, people don't like these people. Don't be these people, all right? We're going to get more negatives about her as they develop. Her and Nick thing is just such an awkward pairing, and it's on purpose. Fitzgerald's going to give you this, torrid love affair between Gatsby and Daisy and this image of, movie star love. And then you're going to get Nick and Jordan, which is just the most ridiculous sense of what love is. But, when we look at it, their relationship is more realistic than Gatsby and Daisy's, sadly, for us today, all right? Okay, next we're going to get conflict. One of our initial conflict points, and it's a big one, is that we find out Tom's got a mistress, all right? Because like I said earlier, she calls and interrupts dinner, or I don't know if they're at dinner, whatever rich people are doing at this point. She calls and interrupts. She does this brazenly. Tom takes the call, which is just such a bold moment when, instead of trying to make up a story or get himself out of this situation, he just acts like it's no big deal. And then we get a lot of description of Daisy's voice here. Again, the image that Daisy's not, she's an idea. That's what we're going to go through a lot. She's an idea to Tom. She's an idea to Gatsby. They're not, she doesn't exist as a person for either of these people. At this point, Daisy shows she's mentioned her daughter before, but now there's some disinterest. Nick is trying to talk to her about it, and he asks about her, just trying to break the tension. And she says, and this is such a horrible line, she says, I suppose she talks and eats and everything. That's all she knows about her child, is that she talks and eats, she guesses. I mean, there's obviously not a lot of love between these people. And then we get another iconic line from this. And there's a lot of important lines in this book, and a lot of them populate this first chapter. But this is how we know Daisy's not as dumb as we think. She says that she hopes that Pam, her daughter, she doesn't say Pam, she hopes she doesn't give her name yet. She says, I hope she grows up to be a beautiful little fool. She says that's the best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool. Now, we'll talk about that more in class about what that means. Why would you want your daughter to be that? Well, she wants her to be beautiful because pretty girls have an opportunity to rise up in the ranks and to get to be, taken in by a wealthy or important person. But she wants her to be a fool so she doesn't really know what's actually going on. That indicates to me that Daisy knows what's going on. She knows what's happening with Tom. She knows what her plight in this world is that she has to marry rich. It's just so she can maintain her level of importance and influence. And we're going to see that that's actually the case later when she does meet up with Gatsby at a later date. And more on that to come. Now, finally, as this chapter closes, and I'm at 23 minutes, and the goal here was to stay under 20, and I apologize, but we get this iconic scene, and it's Gatsby in the green light. And this is, there are 3, I would say, sections of this book that are just they're pop culture references. You may never ever read the book before, and they come up. This is one of them, okay? The second being the billboard with the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. The third being the image of Gatsby throwing shirts on his bed, trying to impress Daisy. Those 3 things are just iconic scenes. But this one of the 3, in my opinion, is the key one. It's the most important, and it kind of symbolizes what this book initially, the premise we start out with. And so as Nick comes home, he looks out and he sees this man standing at the end of a pier, and it's at Gatsby's house, so you can just assume it's Gatsby, and it is. But he's reaching out awkwardly across the bay. towards this green light, which is weird. And we're going to talk later about the concept of the color green because it's associated with several things in this book. But he's reaching out for this green light, and it kind of ends that way. By the way, the language in this section, some of the most beautiful in the entire book. Let me find it really quickly. And again, I apologize for the time here going over. It's hard for me to just simplify this book. I love it so much. So we get... I think this is the section. Yeah. Already it was deep summer on roadhouse roofs and in front of wayside garages where new red gas pumps sat out in pools of light. And when I reached my estate at West Egg, I ran the car under its shed and sat for a while on an abandoned grass roller in the yard. The wind had blown off, leaving a loud, bright night with wings beating in the trees and a persistent organ sound as the full bellows of the earth blew the frogs full of life. The silhouette of a moving cat wavered across the moonlight, and turning my head to watch it, I saw that I was not alone. 50 feet away, a figure had emerged from the shadows of my neighbor's mansion and was standing with his hands in his pockets, regarding the silver pepper of the stars. Something in his leisurely movements and the secure position of his feet upon the lawn suggested that it was Mr. Gatsby himself, come out to determine what share was his of our local heavens. I decided to call to him. Miss Baker had mentioned him at dinner, and that would do for an introduction. But I didn't call to him, for he gave a sudden intimation that he was content to be alone. He stretched out his arms toward the dark water in a curious way, and as far as I was from him, I could have sworn he was trembling. Involuntarily, I glanced seaward and distinguished nothing except a single green light, minute and far away, that might have been the end of a dock. When I looked once more for Gatsby, he had vanished, and I was alone again in the unquiet darkness. It was such a powerful thing. And if you haven't read a lot, you may not understand why Mr. Morse thinks that's such a beautiful passage, and I'm running out of time to explain it, but I promise you we'll talk about it more in class, all right? But we have this image of Gatsby reaching out for this green light. This green light, we will find out later, is at the end of Daisy's pier. So he's reaching out towards her, and that is a key element. And again, that's part of our conflict. We find out, conflict is more than just a fight between two people. It's about something that your main character, your protagonist, really wants, and how they get it and what's going to stand in their way. And Gatsby wants Daisy. Daisy is a love from his past that he has never forgotten, and he wants to recapture that. So as we end the first chapter, we have this beautiful, iconic scene that just has outlived this book and is just now part of our culture. All right? Okay, so thank you for your time. I apologize for going on about 27. It's going to be about 28 minutes when we finish this. I promise to shrink these down, but, it's just so hard because this book is such a beautiful book. So anyway, if you have any questions or want to say anything you noticed that I may not have mentioned, that's what the comment section's for. Mr. Morris is not trying to be a professional YouTuber, but I would like this to be interactive. So by all means, make some comments, say something in the bottom. Let me know what you thought. Tell me why you also love this book, or hey, why you don't, in fact. All right. So, okay, well, we will see you again probably tomorrow. I'll film chapter 2, and we'll be ready for that. So anyway, thank you again for your time, and I hope you guys have an amazing afternoon, evening, wherever it is you're watching this.